What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 79, and I am the host, Kyle Anzalone. Solo show today. I have a good amount of news I want to get through. A couple of things to talk about first. That is the 2021 Libertarian Institute fundraiser is going on right now. Matching donations, so if you donate today, it counts double, and you still get the great kit bets at the regular price, so $25 for a digital book, $50 for a physical book, $100 lifetime listen and think audiobook membership, so anytime they put out a new audiobook, you'll get that, or $200 for a Ron Paul Copper coin. And again, you'll double your donation. We're almost at our goal. So if you guys have been thinking about pulling the trigger and getting yourself, especially the signed copy of one of Scott's books, you know that he might not be doing that all the time. So think about getting that today and helping out the Institute. The other thing I'll mention is our sponsor, Paloma Verde. PalomaVerdeStore.com is the website. Of course, I included in the links at the show notes page, anywhere you find the show. And of course, our promo code PEACE is also on there in case you forget. Be sure to use that when you check out. When you spend $75 or more, you get 25% off, and it also, again, helps out the show. Paloma Verde sells fantastic CBD products. The co-host, Will Porter, is a big fan of the CBD with the extract with melatonin. Helps him with insomnia and get to sleep. I really like the Slav stick. It's like a topical that you put on CBD in it. It helps with inflammation in my bed. So check out any of those products, soft gels, gummies, even stuff for your dog on there. PalomaVerdeStore.com. Be sure to use the promo code PEACE when you check out. All right, let's get into the content today. The first article I have is from Reason.com by Elizabeth Nolan Brown. And this is one of those things that really seems unbelievable. How could we let this happen? How can people just go through and kill disabled animals? Well, you gotta work for the government to be able to do that, apparently. The title of this article, Michigan farmer rescued injured animals without the proper permits. State officials have charged her with a misdemeanor and euthanized the animals. Wish they would have used murder there, because that is what happened. To go through the details of the story now, the woman's name is Julie Hall, and she is a farmer living in the most northern point of Michigan. Will Porter described it as the tip of the mitten, of the state there. And she had, I guess, her whole life, people will show up with maybe a baby raccoon after the mom's been hit by a car, or some other kind of disabled animal. It's blind. She had a one-legged crow, geese who had apparently been injured in hunting accidents but not killed, abandoned deer. And it sounded like this lady knew what she was doing. It wasn't like, she was taking these animals, coddling them, and then, putting them out in the middle of the road or something like that, but rather she was actually going through and making sure the animals knew how to hunt and forage or whatever, and really rehabilitate an animal like any kind of expert would. So she was doing what seems to be an absolute great service to the rest of us, and rather than the Department of Natural Resources come and giving her the Citizen of the Year award for doing all this great work, they showed up and killed the animals and charged her. So to get into some of the more details of the story here, the first thing that happened, I guess, was there was a volunteer who was helping her out. She accused that volunteer of stealing. I don't know the details of that. The volunteer was then upset, called, and reported her to, I guess, several state agencies, including the Department of Agriculture, which actually visited her farm before the state's Department of Natural Resources came, and the Department of Agriculture came, found no violations, and I guess those were actual human beings, even though they worked for the government, and just helped her move some hay around. So, kudos to those people. But then the state's Department of Natural Resources showed up. Hall described them showing up like the SWAT team. They rolled up in 4 vehicles. Maybe, SWAT team's an exaggeration, but, it seems like, at least just for a quick investigation, all you really need are, 2 agents coming out to look around, see what's going on. But the agents come as soon as they arrive, pretty much, I guess, they decide that a deer that she has, they can't do anything with, so they just murder it. They give it 2 shots. The first one puts it, to sleep, and then the second one stops its heart. And then they took a couple of geese and a blind raccoon, and I believe the crow as well. A total of 6 of her animals have now been put down. What kind of monster would you have to be to go to this lady's animal rescue farm, where apparently, the animals are actually being cared for there? It's not like the geese are like standing in their own poop all the time, and they're miserable and you can't do anything with them because they're too aggressive. But rather, she just didn't have the proper permit. That was the issue. So they came in, they decided that they had to kill her animal. And it's just absolutely terrible about what happened here, especially for the animals which the state killed. If anybody else had rolled up on this lady's farm and just shot her, deer and geese, even if they did that and then, took them and tried to process them for meat and everything like that, they would still be viewed as essentially animal murderers and, probably charged with some kind of animal cruelty. And yet, because these people have some kind of badge, because they're from the Department of Natural Resources, DNR. I guess kind of ironically, they get away with it, and it's so sick. And you honestly have to wonder if there's like some kind of thing that compels people to work for the state, because that's where they understand they could actually get away with doing something like this. Again, if a regular person had killed animals like this, I think they would have been charged with some kind of crime. So that's the story of Julie Hall, who unfortunately was doing a great service to her community, and the government came and killed her animals. Another victim of the U.S. police state here is Melinda Harris. And this article, again, from Elizabeth Nolan Brown at Reason. After the cops seized her car, the government waited 5 years before giving her a chance to get it back. And this sounds absolutely crazy, again, but once you get into the details, it's a wonder how the cops get away with this. It says on March 4th, 2015, police in Berkshire County, Massachusetts, seized Melinda Harris's 2011 Infiniti G7 because her son was suspected of dealing drugs. Although Harris had let her son borrow her car, the cops never alleged that he used it for selling drugs or that she knew about her son's illegal activity. Harris heard nothing more about her property until October of 2020, when more than 5 years after the seizure, when she was served with a civil forfeiture complaint that had been prepared previous January. So just to get that and say the cops stole this lady's car and didn't even serve her or give the proper charges or whatever the court motions needed to seize that car for a whole 5 years. So, of course, we know how cars depreciate in value and everything like that, and how vital a car can be to someone, that if you just come and take their car and don't even give them the chance to start to fight it in court for 5 years, it's completely appalling. Now, I'm not sure if this is a case where this particularly turned this lady's life upside down, but it is something that is representative, something that happens in Massachusetts. In the article, it says, according to the Institute of Justice, Massachusetts has the worst civil forfeiture laws in the country. Massachusetts is the only state to earn an F in the latest edition of the organization's Policing for Profit report. And so, this is something that happens in Massachusetts. But to get into the details, she's still fighting this in court. So it's not even like 5 years later they were like, oh, we had this woman's car, the paperwork got lost in the mail, so here, lady, just have it back. Especially since all the charges here and the accusation has to deal with her son and not her. And a tragedy for this lady, her son was murdered 2 years ago in a different city. So the all the crime that was alleged to have potentially been in relation to this car is, that person is now deceased, and so it seems like at this point it would be safe to give her car back. Though they don't have to have probable cause, I think, to they have to have, I guess, probable cause to believe it was used in drug trafficking the property. But in this case, their probable cause was that in her son's bedroom, and upon searching the car, they found uh, 2 parking tickets, occupancy papers, and a Jiffy Lube receipt. And because of that, because the title was in his bedroom, they, I guess, say that was enough to tie him to the car. And even if that, says he drove the car, doesn't mean he used it in any drug dealings. And so I think unless they, have evidence of him dealing drugs in that car or driving to a drug dealing in that car, it's hard to see how that is probable cause, and yet the government called it probable cause, and they're continuing to fight it in court. So I don't know when she's ever going to get her car back, if she does, or if it'll be worth anything by the time she gets it back. Who knows what the police department's been doing, unless they're getting it, an occasional oil change, driving it around a little bit. I mean, this car could be in absolutely worthless shape at this point. Maybe then, if they, could find it raw and full, she could sue for the value of the car. But, that takes a lawyer and a lot of hours. And even though, a 2011 G37 in 2015 probably was worth, a good amount of money, is it, dozens of hours of lawyer time amount of money? Not really. And so it's impossible, really, for the fiscal incentive is for the people allowed to the government to get away with this. And, that's part of the reason why civil asset forfeiture is such a problem in Massachusetts. Be careful if you're in the state. The road pirates will steal your property. The next one I want to talk about is this story from Reuters titled "Twitter Tackles COVID-19 Misinformation with Labels, Strike Policy." And this is something I believe I mentioned it on an episode of Keith Knight's show that is coming out soon that I was on. I talked to him and Pat McFarland. But whenever the COVID-19 stories are brought up now, especially relation or with the vaccine, and then to social media, they always say, oh, these sites have anti-vaxxer or misinformation problems that need to be dealt with. And so, the title right here really implies that there's a misinformation problem that Twitter is trying to tackle. Now, Twitter is censoring opinions of the COVID-19 vaccine outside of the mainstream. So this was a statement from the Twitter headquarters in London, I guess, where they say from the start of the pandemic, really, they've had a policy that they weren't allowing people to spread COVID misinformation. That again, that's what they're saying. And through that policy, they've removed more than 8,400 tweets and challenged, which I guess means put a notification on 11.5 million accounts. So I get those are people who must have been alleged to have been spreading COVID misinformation, but now they want to step it up and tie it more to the vaccine. I guess my concern here is that a lot of this is going to be flagged and done through algorithms. And I've talked in the past on the show how I had a story in one of my news roundups that was just repeating what the mainstream media was saying on COVID, that troops are skeptical of it, of the COVID vaccine. And for that, Twitter flagged that post. And so are we going to now see more of that on Twitter? And of course, if you're an alternative or independent media source, those flags I think really hurt probably your reach and probably de-rank you in the kind of algorithms and stuff that these social media sites do. And then also, I guess they'll do a strike policy where if you're continuing to say these things again, who knows if they're even things that are incorrect, you're going to get flagged. Who hasn't talked to someone who says something along the lines of, I'm just not comfortable getting the vaccine. It seems like these things usually take 5, 10, or more years to develop. A lot of times along the development, we've seen with like the polio vaccine or a swine flu vaccine, where a lot of people have died in that development. So I'm really worried about getting a vaccine for a virus that we just found out about less than 2 years ago now, I guess. And is that going to be called disinformation or misinformation? Because they say they're worried about the misinformation undermining the public trust in the vaccination program, and therefore it's not going to be successful because of that. So I don't know how far they're going to go with this, but I would be careful about what you say about the vaccine on Twitter if you're interested in not getting kicked off, or just be prepared that they're now cracking down more when it comes to the vaccine. There's was a interesting, I guess, dispute between Facebook and Australia that I'm not 100% read in on, so I'm not going to focus on that aspect of this story, but it is important because it precipitated this Facebook investment, where Facebook took all news off of their platforms in Australia because of an Australian government law that required paying news outlets for their content. Now, the Australian law seems wrong to me. If a site wants to be paid for their content, they could put a paywall on that content as their readership for support. There's other ways to do it than having it go through the social media network, but that was a law that Australia had. So for a few days, Facebook took all their content off of Australian, again, platforms, and for whatever negotiations that came out of it, this is the part I'm never read in on. Facebook now has their news content back on platforms in Australia, apparently. But this story from Reuters is Facebook to invest $1 billion in news industry after Australia Row says that Facebook plans to invest $1 billion over the next 3 years in the news industry. And that to me is alarming. It's kind of written as, oh, this is a good thing. But it also says in here that Google has invested $1 billion in the news industry over the last year. And in fact, since 2018, Facebook has invested $600 million. So, this is only a step, like a 50% step up in investment by Facebook on a yearly average in news industry. A lot of these, I think, legacy outlets, especially the smaller local ones, are starting to go out of business. I read recently that a hedge fund had bought the Chicago Tribune, and apparently that hedge fund, through their owner, also owns 4 or 5 other newspapers, kind of local things like the OC Register. So that's going on. I don't want Facebook buying up the whole news industry, because if they're buying up the news industry and censoring what comes out at that level, and then they're also able to censor the content and throttle content on their own platform, it's going to give them a lot more power. I don't think that this is a positive. There's another interesting news story that I came across this week in The Hill. It's titled "Minneapolis Hiring Local Influers to Dispel Misinformation During Derek Chauvin Trial." So there's a few things with this that seem wrong to me. When you're on trial, the state is prosecuting you. So if the state is, I believe they say in this article, $1 million that the city, will spend, and 1.18 million joint information systems plan focused on timely and relevant communications with the community during a period of heightened tension throughout 2021, and again related to the trial of Derek Chauvin, who of course is the police officer who should be thrown in jail for murdering George Floyd. What we I guess have going on and what's highlighted in this article is that they're going to use social media influencers, but these influencers are only going to be paid $2,000 each, so it's nowhere near the bulk of the spending though. But again, Chauvin is being prosecuted by the state and by the government, and so to have the government then spending money to inform the community about your trial does seem quite problematic. And trying to court a public perception could fit this guy as well situation. Assuming that's what ends up going on. I mean, this could also be a narrative to try to whitewash and to cleanse the Minneapolis police of the crimes of Derek Chauvin and stuff like that as well. I'm not saying that is just going to be to target the police officer or to build up the Black Lives Matter movement, but it's certainly going to be used to push the state narrative forward. And essentially, this is $1 million to be spent on propaganda. Targeting the social media influencers, I think is important to mention, just because a lot of times, and me and Pat McFarlane talked about this recently, for some people, independent media has a lot more credibility just inherently than the legacy media. And so influencers, I think, would tend to fall in the independent media category. And so we kind of think that, well, of all things, they're not the ones funded by the state. But here we are, the city of Minneapolis is going to start funding them. And they're going to give out a specific narrative. That's what it says they're going to do in here. All right, the next story I have is an update on Capitol Police Officer Brian Sidney. For those of you who are subscribers to the show, you know that I've been talking about this. Essentially, the guy died, and throwing some skepticism on the official narrative that he was beaten to death by a Trump mob. We now know that's not true, and even the New York Times has updated their story to reflect that. But here we have a very interesting story that completely flew under the radar. This is from NBC News. It's not from some alternative media outlet. This is, just statements and official narrative coming out from the government. They say that the FBI is targeting a single assailant as it continues to investigate the death of Capitol Police Officer Brian Sidney, who they right here say died from injuries sustained in the January 6th riot. But then if we scroll down just a couple of paragraphs here, they say agents have not pinpointed Sidney's exact cause of injuries, but recently said they suspected it was from a potential spray type irritant such as bear spray that he inhaled during the riots. The investigation into Sidney's death is being treated as an assault. And I mean, that seems to be kind of curious here too, that they say they're investigating Sidney's death, so what happened to him that day, but they're no longer looking at this as a homicide. They're looking at it as an assault, which means they, I guess, don't think that that's what killed Sidney if it was just an assault. So I don't know. I don't want to read too much into this, just in case that there's some kind of legal technicality here. But it really does seem like there's more and more evidence building that this guy was certainly not beaten to death by the Trump mob, but may not have even been killed because of what happened at the Capitol, and just died from a medical type episode. All right. Next story I have here, again from Reuters, this one titled Venezuela's Guaido, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken discuss return to democracy. And I wanted to bring up this one because I think it's important to draw attention to all the places where Biden's foreign policy is looking exactly like Trump's foreign policy. And Venezuela, you couldn't really tell the difference between Blinken and Pompeo if you were only looking at their statements and rhetoric. Here, Blinken had a call with Juan Guaido on Tuesday. Listeners to the show know, but just for anybody new, Juan Guaido is the guy in 2019 who really wasn't known by the Venezuelan people and happened to hold a leadership position of a legislative body, declared himself to be president. This was not in coordination with the Venezuelan opposition. When he declared himself president, there's Venezuelan opposition leaders who, walked away with it and haven't supported it. But the U.S. has pretended like this guy is leading the revolution against Maduro in Venezuela. And despite his several attempts to do that, because for a very long time, and I believe even now, is was allowed to be a free man in Venezuela, was not able to inspire any popular support. And despite all of this, him not really having a claim to the throne, especially not now, even the position that he once held when he proclaimed himself to be president, he no longer holds that. Some international support has started to withdraw from Guaido. There are a couple European countries that had initially supported his claim who have now withdrawn it. I think that would be the smart move for the U.S. as well. However, it doesn't look like that's going to happen. Biden has recently said, this is from February 28th, Biden is in no rush to lift Venezuela's sanctions and seeks serious steps by Maduro. These articles by Reuters are very interesting. And of course, on two recent shows, we discussed the Mads Blumenthal piece saying how at least the UK Foreign Office was paying Reuters and they were producing information to help weaken Russia. Is something like this going on in Venezuela? Because in the articles they're saying that Maduro is being propped up by Russia and China and Iran and Cuba, which those are all allies of the Venezuelan state led by Nicolas Maduro. But at the same time, when Juan Guaido was holding protests and trying to rally support, a hell of a lot more people showed up to go support Maduro. I think Sky Horn says that, they all showed up to the presidential palace, all like the poor people of Venezuela, but they were facing out. They weren't looking to lynch the guy inside. They were looking to protect him from being couped. And so even though I don't support the communist government in Venezuela, I wouldn't want to live there even without the devastation that the U.S. has inflicted on that country. I'm a free market guy, and I think that if my movement started building any momentum, the Venezuelan government would crack down on me. That being said, there's a lot of support in Venezuela for Nicolas Maduro, and the U.S. can't pretend that there is none, and that if it tries to thrust Juan Guaido or another opposition leader onto the people of Venezuela, there's a lot of them, and maybe a majority of them, who would reject that. Okay. Next up here from Dave D. Camp at Anti-War. Oh, no, I have from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. This is on Ukraine. The Pentagon announces $125 million in military aid for Ukraine. Dave DeCamp writes, on Monday, the Pentagon announced a $125 military aid package for Ukraine. The $125 million includes 2 armed Mark 6 patrol boats, giving Ukraine a total of 8 such vessels divided by the U.S. I believe these are made at least in part by Lockheed Martin, so they're set to profit off of this. So this package is, Dave writes, is the first part of $275 million approved by Congress for Ukraine in the 2021 fiscal year, as per the 2021 National Defense Authorization Act. The additional $125 million is contingent on Ukraine reforming its military. And so here we're giving them armed patrol boats, even though they haven't gone through with the military reforms yet. And it's just, silly that you would do that, especially when the military reforms are there. As Mads Blumenthal has highlighted, this is from an episode of The Real News hosted by Aaron Mate interviewing Mads Blumenthal in 2018. The U.S. is arming neo-Nazis in Ukraine. During the Obama administration, the U.S., led by Joe Biden, was one of the key people on this policy, along with Victoria Nuland, led a effort in Ukraine to overthrow the government there, supported by the National Endowment for Democracy. And when they overthrew the government in Ukraine and put in a new government, the new government got a lot of support from neo-Nazis. At the time, the group was known as the Azov Battalion, but a lot of those forces have now bled into the Ukrainian armed forces. And so when we're giving these weapons, we're giving the weapons to a force that contains neo-Nazis. The Biden administration refused to give military aid to Ukraine at the time, in part because of this, in part because it would escalate tensions with Russia. The Trump administration reversed that policy and started to give military aid. Of course, Trump famously withheld this aid for a short amount of time that the Ukrainians didn't even know about, and was then impeached for it when he more likely should have been impeached for giving this aid to the Ukrainians in the first place. I'm guessing that the second installment of that will go through whether or not the Ukrainians kick all the white supremacists out of their armed forces or not. All right, now moving on to the Russia story. Again, from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. U.S. Air Force jets trained to launch missiles over Baltic Sea. So the U.S., I believe, with F-15s, trained with the British Royal Air Force over the Baltic Sea. There was no live fire during these missions, but it was a provocative move towards Russia. If anybody's watching the YouTube video, we have a map up here in the antiwar.com article of where the Baltic Sea is. You can see that Russia actually has their little Kaliningrad enclave that is on the Baltic Sea, and then mainland Russia through the Gulf of Finland borders the Baltic Sea, and this is a very close to Russian territory. While we have this map up here, if people are looking, take note of where the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania are, because just after carrying out these Air Force drills, this is from Reuters, U.S. bomber flies over Baltic states and show of solidarity. It writes, a nuclear-capable long-range U.S. bomber flew over the capitals of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia on Wednesday, and what they claim is a show of solidarity to NATO allies, but is really a show of force to Russia. Moving on in this article, I thought it was interesting to note that the bomber that flew on Wednesday was one of the 4 bombers, I believe they're B-1B Lancers, that were deployed to Norway on February 22nd. And that was a new deployment. The U.S. had never bombed or put bombers in Norway before. There's also 200 Air Force personnel there with those bombers. So the more provocative actions towards Russia, these are the kind of things that were happening a lot during the Trump administration. And look, what do you know? The Biden administration is picking up with so many of them. This also from Reuters, the U.S. Treasury Department slapped sanctions on 7 Russian officials over the Navalny poisoning. I'm still pretty skeptical if the Navalny poisoning is what they claim it is. They say that Putin ordered the FSB, the Russian intelligence service, to put, I guess it was somebody's decision to put the nerve agent Novichok in his underwear. He was on a plane. The plane landed. He eventually got to Germany, where they say they treated him and discovered Novichok in his system, but he lives. He went back to Russia, where he was sentenced to 2.5 years in jail. Look, I'm not saying that Putin's a good guy or that the opposition in Russia don't have it rough, but at the same time, the U.S. doesn't need to be applying more sanctions to Russia. We already have several rounds of sanctions on Russia, and we need to be working on increasing ties and diplomatic actions with Russia and not destroying relations. This again from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com, who is just doing an absolutely heroic amount of work. I think I saw that he posted this on the 3rd on Twitter, that he had written 10 articles, 10 of these articles, and they're just so important to understand what's actually happening in the world. He writes, the title of this article, U.S. Indo-Pacific Command cedes $27 billion to face China. He writes, with the U.S. foreign policy increasingly focused on Asia to counter China, the U.S. military command in the region is looking for more money. In a new report delivered to Congress on Monday, U.S. Indo-Pacific Command called for about 27 billion in additional spending between 2022 and 2027 so it could better counter China. And so they constantly want more money for more weapons because that's going to help something. But there's a great article today that everybody should check out by Willa Storr at Tom's Dispatch, and it's titled "Rewarding Failure: Why Pentagon weapons programs rarely get canceled despite major programs." And he just goes through in here. I'll highlight a few of them that he does. The F-35, which is going to cost a total of $1.7 trillion, is an absolute piece of junk. He says, even more troubling, the plane can't be cleared for flying in the light if lightning is anywhere in the area, which is deeply ironic that it's called the Lightning II. So again, they nicknamed the plane the Lightning, struggling to fly in the Lightning. We also have the Boeing KC-46 tanker. This is supposed to be a refueling tanker that was even better than the refueling tanker before. They were going to use cameras rather than a direct window to, I guess, set up the refueling. However, that's not going so well, and the Air Force is now thinking that maybe they're going to transition these into something other than Air Force refueling tankers, going to repurpose them because they're not working and they're leaking fuel and have all kinds of other problems. There's also the Ford class of aircraft carriers where the elevators to load, bring the weapons up to load the planes aren't working, and then the launch mechanism isn't working very well. And also in the Navy, you have the littoral combat ships, which are nicknamed little crappy ships. They have a propulsion system design flaw that turned them into floating garbage piles. The Navy bought 10 of them for $500 million each, but they put all future orders on hold. And then, of course, I've talked about on the show a lot, the USS Zumwalt class of destroyer that costs a ton of money. They're supposed to build 32 of them. Fortunately, for our wallets, they only end up building 3, but spending $22 billion on the 3. This is a destroyer that doesn't have a main weapon because the rounds cost too much money. So they just don't have one on there. So yeah, the military industrial complex is wasting tons of money, and yet they're coming for more. This is one of the things I do like about like the Ron Swanson style libertarian, where he goes, "Oh, I have a gun on my desk," and people who come asking for money have to look down the barrel of it. I wish the military felt that way, where after they take so much, over $1 trillion a year, they come asking for more all the time. The next thing I want to talk about is one of the more important stories that I have today because of where it could escalate and go. 10 rockets land at an Iraqi base housing U.S. forces. This is from Reuters. On Wednesday, Iraq's al-Assad Air Base, which hosts U.S. coalition and Iraqi forces, was hit by 10 rockets, I believe, fired from the east side of the base. Now, an interesting thing happened during this rocket attack. During the attack, a contractor died from a cardiac episode. It does seem like the Biden administration has been very careful to make sure that they are saying that, while this happened, it's not, he didn't get hit with the rocket. But I have seen other people run headlines like the one from CNN. U.S. civilian contractor died during rocket attack on an airbase in Iraq. Makes it sound a lot more like he was killed by the rocket, which doesn't seem to be the case. Just for anybody watching the show, I have a map of Iraq up here. I'll put my I can't show you my cursor. I guess al-Assad Air Base, if you're looking at the map, you see where it says Iraq below the Arabic letters. It's located a little bit north of that area. So for anybody who it's just listening right now, I guess you'll have to look up that image, but it is up there for people watching. the reason why this is important is because this is from AP News. U.S. warns of military response to attack on Iraq base, and they're saying that they could possibly carry out a military response. The Pentagon spokesperson said the U.S. wouldn't shy away from responding when necessary after the rocket attack. And then we have this other one from Reuters saying, headline, new attack on Iraqi airbase fits profile of Iranian Ba'ath militia, U.S. official says. And so here they're not even like doing actually any research or intelligence. They're just saying, well, it fits the profile. And is that good enough for the U.S. to order a whole bunch of people get blown up in airstrikes and continue to escalate here? Of course, that is whatever militia carried out this attack once. They know that if they carry out these attacks, the U.S. is going to escalate, which is going to provoke more attacks. And I guess their hope is that eventually at some point the U.S. will just have no choice but to essentially withdraw its soldiers from Iraq to keep them from being hit by these missiles and trying to drive the U.S. out of the country. The other issue you have is when you just say, well, it fits the profile. Other people know it fits the profile too. The Islamic State fighters, while absolutely insane, could probably figure out that, hey, if we could launch some rockets at an Iraqi base that houses U.S. soldiers, then we could potentially turn our enemies against each other. That's another very important detail in all of this, is that when we're deciding to fight against the Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, we're fighting against the forces that are most dedicated against fighting the Islamic State. So that's a real problem with the U.S. policy. But I think we're just going to continue to go down this cycle in the days to come. I don't think this will be the last rocket attack. I think the U.S. House will continue to cry, and they'll play up the whole a guy died during it, just like they did with the Brian Sitnett during the Capitol, and try to use that to get the Biden administration to carry out more airstrikes. One interesting story on Iran today. This is from Jason Ditz at antiwar.com. State Department nominee says U.S. will keep sanctions on Iran even with deal. And so this is Wendy Sherman, who is the nominee for Deputy Secretary of State, suggests that even if negotiations are concluded, leading to the U.S. to return to the P5+1 nuclear deal with Iran, the U.S. would keep many of its anti-Iranian sanctions in place. I think this is another pretty troubling sign for the Biden administration to get back in the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. This woman, if she's confirmed, which I think she likely will be, I've only seen I think one Biden nominee get rejected so far, and that was Neera Tanden, and that's only because she's unpleasant, publicly on Twitter. If she was just a regular warhawk, she would have been confirmed. But this lady, Wendy Sherman, I would assume will end up getting confirmed. And if her policy is that we're not going to return to we won't lift all the sanctions on Iran, and there's other issues, and we're going to keep up at least parts of Trump's maximum pressure campaign, even if we do undo some sanctions, that seems problematic for Iran returning to the deal, and it could be another one of those poison pills that Biden personnel are sticking into the potential hopes of that. A couple stories out of Afghanistan here. This from CBS News. ISIS claims responsibility for slaying of 3 women media members in Afghanistan. This was in outside of the capital of the Nangarhar province, Jalalabad, and this is an area of Afghanistan that's had the highest Islamic State presence. Now, the Islamic State in Afghanistan is a little bit interesting. These are people from Pakistan who are refugees of Barack Obama's and the Pakistani military offensive and Waziristan of that country. And there's the Tehrik-e Taliban there, although they're not aligned with the Afghan Taliban. And in fact, during the Trump administration, there were even reports at times the U.S. using air power to assist Taliban in offensives against the Islamic State in Afghanistan. But once these people were driven over the border into uh, Afghanistan, they rose the black flag of the Islamic State. They pledged allegiance to Baghdadi and declared themselves the Khorasan province. So they've been wreaking havoc in eastern Afghanistan for several years now, and this is another attack that they are apparently behind. I want to note that when I first saw the reporting on this, the Afghan government was attempting to blame the Taliban for it. Of course, the Afghan government, I think, has been trying to play up the cruelty of the Taliban in the recent year because of the Trump Taliban peace deal that they're trying to prevent from actually happening. And so just be mindful if there's any attacks in Afghanistan, especially in the Nangarhar province, that maybe this is the Islamic State, even if the immediate finger, portrayed in the mainstream media is pointed at the Taliban. Because we had today a roadside bomb in Afghanistan killed a female doctor. It's possible the Taliban are horrible people and, do terrorize the Afghani community. They are no threat to the Americans if they're outside the essentially just Pashtunistan portion of Afghanistan. But at the same time, they can be horrible people. So I don't want to say that, they wouldn't do something like this. But I think there's a lot of effort right now to paint the Taliban in the most negative light possible, even if it's not true. To make it so that Biden can't withdraw forces from Afghanistan, which is probably what the Islamic State Khorasan group is looking to have, because they are jihadist types, and the goal of bin Laden, after all, was to draw the Americans into Afghanistan and then the Middle East and Iraq to bleed the American empire. Few stories on Yemen. U.S. officials, this was the ambassador or the envoy to Yemen, Timothy Lenderkin, have met with Yemen Houthi officials. The meeting occurred in Oman, the capital Muscat, and is the first time that I believe the two sides have met through the whole war. Maybe this is one of the real advantages to the Biden administration not going ahead with the Trump's the last minute labeling of the Houthi as a foreign terrorist organization, because then the sanctions would have gotten in the way of this meeting. So that's a decent sign that maybe there is some diplomacy happening. However, we also have the U.S. announcing that they're placing sanctions on two leaders of the Houthi movement, and even if they specify in the article that these are military leaders of the Houthi movement, if you're sanctioning the leadership of the military or the political part of the movement, it is going to make that movement feel like you're not sincere in your negotiation efforts when the two are happening so close together. One more thing I want to point out on Yemen, this article from Middle East Eye: Saudi Arabia arms deals, UK prolonging Yemen war with weapons sales. And this refers to that even though the Biden administration has said they're ending offensive weapon sales to Yemen, I think that may be somewhat of a meaningless gesture, because they have said they're going to help Saudi Arabia's defensive weapons and continue to supply them with that. But at the same time, ending the offensive weapon sales may be helpful in curtailing some of what Saudi Arabia is doing in Yemen. But the UK, which provides a lot of offensive weapons to the Saudi coalition along with the US, won't stop providing offensive weapons. They're going to go ahead with it. And at the same time, they're cutting the amount of aid that they're sending to Yemen in what is the world's worst humanitarian crisis. So terrible things happening from the UK on Yemen. A couple interesting stories here from Tigray. Both are from Reuters. I'm skeptical of both. I don't know how to go about confirming either of these stories, but they claim war crimes against the Tigrayans by the Ethiopian government. I have no reason to doubt that it's true. They say in this story that fires appear to have been deliberately set and destroyed more than 500 structures. And then another one saying that hundreds of civilians were killed in the town of Atsum by Eritrean troops in Ethiopia, and this would be the neighboring country. And on the episode, the show with Danny Sherjan, we talked about how even though The Ethiopian prime minister was praised for, ending the long-time dispute with the neighboring country in Eritrea, received a Nobel Peace Prize for it. What he ends up doing with that Nobel Peace Prize is inviting the Eritreans into Ethiopia to help kill some people in Tigray. And so that's what they're investigating there. It did seem to happen some. Now, did these mass atrocities happen? I'm not sure if I could, how to go about confirming that, but it's being reported. The reason I think these two stories are important and want to talk about them, even if I can't confirm the truth, is because U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is trying to pressure the African Union to do something about the worsening crisis in Ethiopia's Tigray. It doesn't explicitly say that he's calling for them to take military action or anything like that, but at the same time, this is what I'm worried about with the Biden administration, is that they believe in this idea of R2P, responsibility to protect, that they're the great people that stand taller and see further than everyone else, and they know where the massacres are going to happen on the face of the earth and where they could intervene to prevent that from happening. And so if they've identified Ethiopia as a country with a potential massacre, genocide, atrocity coming, and that they could somehow stop it, they're going to do everything they can. And just in this region alone, we've seen Libya and Syria, especially during the Obama administration, where this principle was used to fuel civil wars that have killed hundreds of thousands, if not more. So we absolutely should reject that principle and using it in Tigray, and be skeptical of war propaganda coming out there, and keep an eye on what the Biden administration is saying about Ethiopia. All right. That's the show for today. I hope everybody enjoyed the shows this week. I'll be back Monday with Will Porter. I have an interview lined up for Tuesday of next week, and I'll hopefully have somebody else for Thursday as well. Really excited what's happening with the show. Make sure you check out the Facebook page. I was just looking at the analytics today. Post engagements are up like 31,000% in the past month. You guys are out there sharing the show, liking the show, and it is really helping. Likes are in, the views are going up in different places. So keep up all of your support. Keep sharing it. Me and Will are putting in a lot of effort to put out short clips from the shows to share on different platforms to try to get people interested in what we're doing here. I think the content looks really good. If you got any feedback, always let us know. But if you're enjoying it and you see one of them, when you're scrolling through your Twitter or Facebook feed, make sure you hit the share button, and that way you'll get it out there to more people. Subscribe to the show on YouTube. Video version also goes up at both Library and Odysee, which are alternatives to YouTube, and allow you to tokenize your content. And so that means that if my stuff goes viral, I get more tokens for that. And it's a way to get feedback and for y'all to support the show through the library credits. We're also taking Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash donations. You could donate to the show at Patreon, Subscribestar. If you have any other way you want to give me money, let me know. I'll take a check or whatever you got. And so you support the Institute, Paloma Verde, use the promo code PEACE. And again, back with new shows next week.